When comparing the borders of the French Empire at its height in 1812 to modern Europe, drastic changes become clear. Surprisingly, most of this transformation happened in just a few years, in 1814, when Europe's dominant powers came together to reshape the continent after Napoleon's downfall. This pivotal moment in European history reveals a pattern. The most lasting changes took place within 1814 and 1815.
What led to the formation of the German Confederation, the creation of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, the drafting of the Treaty of Paris or France's constitutional charter, and how did all of these and more occur in less than a span of a year? All of these and more were the work of the Congress of Vienna.
Congress of Vienna was sort of an all-star negotiating event. It was the first major get-together of all of the heads of Europe.
To understand the responsibilities and negotiations of the Congress, it becomes important to know why diplomacy was necessary in an era of war. From 1789 to 1799, the French Revolution was a political bloodbath, ravaging the streets of France with pandemonium. The rebellion was host to all different forms of government. The French Republic, created in 1792, was replaced in 1795 by the Directory, and a bit later in 1799, the Consulate. Throughout this period, one man exploited the turmoil to initiate a coup and seize control, Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1804 created the French Empire.
Napoleon would develop a vast army for France, then starting the Napoleonic Wars, a series of wars continuing the French Revolution into the early 1800s. His empire would expand across Europe, but Napoleon's ambition led to his own downfall. His massive army, full of soldiers, were directed to go after Russia, a massive blunder. Russia would join the other nations, including Austria, Prussia, and Great Britain, to put an end to the bloodshed. These four, and smaller states like Sweden and Saxony, became known as the Sixth Coalition. And after a month of killing, on April 11, 1814, Napoleon signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau, leading him to exile in Elba. France, meanwhile, was left in a state of turmoil, and Europe, territorial madness.
The countries now with control of France would need to undo more than 2 decades of war, taking steps to replace the dictatorship with the Bourbon monarchy, actually redraw France to its pre-Napoleon borders, and evenly distribute the powers of Europe. Napoleon would speak in heavy disdain on the new French monarchy, stating, quote, "Under a feeble government, there's but one step from discontent to insurrection. Under the imbecile government like that of France in 1814, after the departure of M. de Talleyrand, conspiracy has free scope." The first major work coming from the newly Bourbon France was the Treaty of Paris, 1814, a document that formally ended the War of the Sixth Coalition. The document's Article 32 asked, quote, "All the powers engaged on either side in the present war shall within the space of 2 months send plenipotentiaries to Vienna for the purpose of regulating, in General Congress, the arrangements which are to complete the present treaty."
In September of 1814, the plenipotentiaries would reach Vienna, Austria. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, and later on France's new administration came together to establish a new European order. The Congress was only meant to negotiate for 4 weeks, while the negotiations would eventually stretch for 8 long and dense months of change. Most of these meetings in these 8 months remained informal, as the nations had been signing secret treaties and alliances behind each other's backs. The actions of the Congress included political negotiations, momentous church services, banquets, balls, and more frivolous activities. Explaining the purpose of a Congress, the 8th Duke of Argyll, George Campbell, once remarked, "A Congress is not a court of justice, or where any matter can be conclusively settled by vote or majority. It is essentially an assembly, in which an endeavor is made to set high matters in dispute by discussion and mutual concession." The Congress of Vienna included more than 200 families of nobility, including members of extreme conservatism. In order to show mutual concessions on the topics discussed in the meetings, they chose ministers and leaders with diplomatic specialty. The most conservative of all was the Assembly's chair, Clemens von Metternich, an Austrian foreign minister also known as the Coachman of Europe. As the lead member of the Congress, he was by far the most influential, as an advocate for taking charge of the Italian and German states.
The next two were probably the second most influential, the Russian Emperor, Tsar Alexander I, and British Foreign Minister Viscount Castlereagh. Viscount Castlereagh, also known as Robert Stewart, was at the time by the Duke of Wellington. He opposed Russian expansion and instead wanted to strengthen Italian and German states. On the other side of the two conservatives came the lenient Russian Emperor, the Tsar Alexander I. He spearheaded the redrawing of Europe's map, wanted to control Poland, would write the Holy Alliance in 1815 excluding Britain, and was known for using both liberal ideas and conservative policies. But eventually, France would work its way into the assembly, represented by the French foreign minister Talleyrand, known for his usage of crafty and cynical diplomacy. France had the second biggest population and the most developed military, so they were added to also promote balance of power in January of 1815 with some smaller states. Majority of the Congress distrusted Talleyrand, even the man he was supposed to advise, Louis XVIII.
What the French foreign minister did, and something that we can use and take advantage of in our everyday lives, is he saw that the other people across the table had different interests from each other. And when their division became apparent, he realized that he could throw his weight to one side or the other and tip the balance in their favor.
Put short and sweet by historian Mark Jarrett, a single treaty, the Vienna Final Act, created a body for new political law for Europe. Though the actions of the Congress tried to distance Europe from formal liberal and revolutionary ideologies that had developed so far, they favored far more than just conservatism. In the early stages of the newly ruled France, the Quadruple Alliance asked Louis XVIII to create a constitution, one that guaranteed civil rights to French citizens who were likely confused by the rapidly changing rulership of their country. The Articles of the Constitutional Charter of 1814 gave Frenchmen equality above the law, guaranteed freedom of speech, of religion, of printing, and of publishing. These rights weren't only for the French, as in 1814, German publishers would send a petition to the Congress with the goal of stopping the unauthorized printing of their writing, which after some time, the petition would be successful. Along with that, some of the documents, like the Treaty of Paris or the Final Act of Vienna, would condemn and practically abolish the slave trade. And the Final Act of the Congress of Vienna also discussed broader rights, like the neutrality of Switzerland, protections for German Jews, and the right to freely navigate European rivers, a document that would conclusively collect months of diplomacy into one piece.
The Assembly was responsible for addressing the key issues following the influences coming from both the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, all of which were related to the stabilization of Europe, in order to ensure a smooth transition from Bonaparte's failure of a regime. In reaching this end goal, they are specifically responsible for, number 1, balancing the dominating powers of Europe. They led to the Concert of Europe, a 99-year period that had no major wars up until World War I. The powerhouse nations instituted the Congress of Vienna system that managed Europe, and although it fell apart in 1920, the country still kept a mutual peace. Number 2, enclosing France's borders. The territorial settlement between the powers was comprised of 3 main agreements. These agreements include A. Treaty of Paris of 1814, B. Final Act of 1815, C. Treaty of Paris of 1815. Third, it also restored the conservative order, involving Louis XVIII and the Bourbon Restoration.
The Congress of Vienna isn't like any other Congress, for it is one whose works remain reminiscent in European law today. The convening of monarchs, ministers, and diplomats all under the same roof was a way to condemn the acts of war previously and find mutual concession for all the nations and for their constituents. The Congress of Vienna would also lead to the Congress system, with 5 more Congresses in the 1800s with the goal of upholding this new diplomatic age in European history, which would also start the Concert of Europe, a 99 period without any major wars. The Congress system would heavily influence the formation of the League of Nations and then later the United Nations. Universal ideas like a balance of power were put on display to handle the ultimate failure of a liberal dictatorship left by Napoleon, also showing why supreme and ultimate power shouldn't be prioritized by those who rule.